Today's episode is sponsored by NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast. Making financial decisions shouldn't feel like picking a TV show. Too many options, too much hype, and no way to know what's actually good. NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast cuts through the clutter. Their finance journalists break through real-world money decisions with clear research-backed insights. From investing to home buying to credit cards, the nerds help you navigate major financial decisions with confidence. Leave TV to fate. Leave your next financial move to the nerds. Follow NerdWallet's Smart Money Podcast wherever you listen.
Before we begin, do you have a theory about this case or a story of your own? Share it with me at nightwatchfiles@gmail.com. Your insights might be featured in a future episode. The shouting started early in the morning of April 1st, 1984. Marvin had been on edge for several days. He was pacing the halls of his parents' home, the home he bought for them. At times, he would stop and peer through the curtains, convinced someone might be watching. He checked locks repeatedly, often retreating back into his bedroom only to emerge again minutes later. Sleep had been rare. He was paranoid, anxious, and deeply unsettled. The house had become a pressure cooker. Marvin's physical health was deteriorating. He'd lost weight, and the hollowed look in his eyes reflected a mind that could not find peace. Conversations with his mother, Alberta, were fragmented. He confided in her, but even she couldn't reach the center of his torment. His relationship with his father remained tense. The smallest triggers could ignite something serious. That morning, the catalyst came in the form of a missing insurance document. A minor issue on the surface, but for Marvin's father, it was enough to spark anger. He began shouting at Alberta in the kitchen, his voice rising with each passing second. Marvin heard it from his room. He emerged quickly, barefoot, his robe clutched around him. His tone was firm, confrontational. "Don't you talk to her like that." His father turned. The two locked eyes. Marvin stepped forward and shoved him in the chest. Alberta rushed between them, her voice shaking as she begged them to stop. Marvin's chest was heaving. He didn't back down. "If you ever lay a hand on her," he warned, "I'll kill you." The hallway was still. His father didn't say a word. He stared at Marvin for a moment, expression unreadable, then turned and walked away. Marvin stayed where he was for a few seconds, then turned and walked back into his room. He sat on the edge of his bed, slumped forward. Alberta followed and stood in the doorway, her hands clasped. She wanted to say something, anything, but the words never came. Then, Marvin Gaye Sr. appeared in the doorway. In his right hand, a .38 caliber revolver. Marvin Gaye Sr., born on a farm in Jessamine County, Kentucky in 1914, was the third of 13 children. The family later moved to Charles Avenue in West Lexington. Marvin Sr.'s parents had been sharecroppers, and his mother, Mamie Gaye, broke from the community by joining the House of God, a Pentecostal sect, where she was said to be the first female member. Marvin Sr. followed his mother into the church, becoming an active member and traveling through the South as a teenager with evangelist Sister Fame. He described his early life to journalist and biographer David Ritz in 1979, recalling his enraptured state with God amidst the hardships of farm work during the Depression. On July 2, 1935, Marvin Sr. married Alberta in Washington, D.C., and they initially lived in the Southwest Projects. Their first daughter, Jean, was born 2 years later. Marvin Pence Gaye Jr. was born in Freedman's Hospital in Washington, D.C. on April 2, 1939, a Sunday. David Ritz recounts an interview in 1982 where Marvin Sr. expressed the importance of having a male child, a namesake. He told Ritz, with Alberta present, that he felt Marvin Jr. was destined for greatness from the day he was born. As David Ritz notes in the book Divided Soul, Marvin Sr. exhibited a significant degree of self-centeredness, believing in his extraordinary powers as a man of God, including the power to heal. The elder Gaye spoke of establishing their home as a church in Washington, emphasizing the strong religious preparation his children received. This intense early spirituality of his father would profoundly influence the young Marvin Jr., who as an adult remembered Marvin Sr. telling him stories that left a deep impression. fostering a kinship with powerful singers like Marian Anderson and Mahalia Jackson, women of great triumph. Marvin recalled realizing early on through dreams that he too was destined to be such a singer. However, David Ritz observed a division within Marvin Sr., as he later abandoned his spiritual obsessions for more worldly pursuits. This division, according to Ritz, was mirrored in Marvin Jr.'s adult life. Marvin lived with the fear of inheriting his father's characteristics. He idealized the relationship between Jesus and his heavenly Father as the perfect example of pure, divine love, a marked contrast to the absence of such love from his own earthly father, which became a major source of frustration. Feelings of sexual inadequacy permeated Marvin Jr.'s life, a complexity further compounded by his father's sexual ambivalence, as David Ritz explains. Both men viewed sex as a dangerous force. Dewey Hughes, a childhood acquaintance of Marvin Jr., told Ritz that Marvin was a boy in pain, very shy and afraid of girls, and seemingly ashamed of his father. Hughes recalled that they were never invited inside Marvin's home, and that Mr. Gay was perceived as flamboyant and extremely effeminate, leading to Marvin being teased. Alberta Gay confided in David Ritz that 5 of her husband's siblings were homosexual, and that her husband was attracted to soft clothing, including her undergarments, shoes, and gowns, which Marvin sometimes witnessed. This confusion about manhood, Ritz argues, became another great theme in Marvin Gaye's life, leading him to seek strong male role models in boxing and football. Alberta Gay revealed to David Ritz that her husband began drinking heavily in the 1950s, which worsened his relationship with Marvin, for whom he never developed any love. Marvin remembered his father frequently threatening to disown him or ban him from the house, to which Marvin would retort that the apartment belonged to his mother, who paid the rent, a statement his father resented. His father would accuse him of associating with bums, referring to other kids who loved to sing, ironically touching a nerve in Marvin, who confessed to Ritz his admiration for Bum's ability to forget responsibility. The pain of his childhood, including his father's beatings and emotional neglect, deeply scarred Marvin, making it difficult for him to cope with his later success. By 15, Marvin was growing restless, developing a critical awareness of his surroundings and questioning societal norms, including racial discrimination. Marvin Sr. told David Ritz that he had wanted Marvin to become an attorney, but lacking the qualifications, he insisted his son enlist in the military. David Ritz observed a shared intellectual arrogance between father and son, compensating for their lack of formal education by claiming expertise in various subjects. According to Marvin, he joined the Air Force because he was, quote, sick to death of father's household, and felt he didn't have the concentration for high school and was afraid of failing to meet his father's standards. He saw it as an act of defiance rather than obedience. However, his military experience was disastrous. Marvin failed to adjust and was in open rebellion against authority, his extreme sensitivity smashed against a brick wall of regimentation. He later admitted his military experience showed how spoiled he was and that he couldn't wait to get out of the service, finding nothing good about it except losing his virginity. He returned from the Air Force in the summer of 1957. Marvin Gaye Sr., in addition to being a preacher, was also a singer, a fact often overshadowed by the more dramatic and tragic elements of his relationship with his son. According to Marvin Gaye Jr., his father possessed genuine vocal talent. My father himself had a great voice and the capacity to become a great singer, he once recalled, acknowledging the musical gift that ran through the family. That lineage of vocal ability was affirmed by relatives on his mother's side as well. A distant cousin once observed, "Every member of our family was blessed with a good voice. The joy of music was the joy of God," reinforcing the idea that music, and by extension, singing, was seen not only as a family trait, but as a spiritual calling. Marvin Jr.'s early exposure to music was deeply tied to his father's religious work. He accompanied his father on missions, absorbing the emotional intensity of spiritual gatherings. The Spirit was there, in the room and in the songs. "The Spirit enraptured me," he recalled. "The strength of my singing surprised me. That's how I found the courage to sing according to feeling. I realized my voice was a gift of God and had to be used to praise Him." Though the quote centers on Marvin Jr.'s own awakening as a singer, it also shows the central role music played in his father's ministry. But even in the context of church, music became another point of tension between father and son. Marvin Jr. remembered that when his singing drew admiration, especially from female members of the congregation, it provoked his father's disapproval. At gospel meetings, for example, when I pleased all the women, he'd look at me like I'd done something very bad, he said. He hated it when my singing won more praise than his sermons. As Marvin grew, his initial connection to spiritual singing began to wane. He wondered, as Ritz recounts, if he would have stayed with his father in the church had Marvin Sr. remained devout. While the biblical teachings stayed with him, by his early teens, so many sorts of music were buzzing in my ear, he told Ritz, with other musical voices proving stronger. Thus, somewhat guiltily, Marvin stepped into the world of secular singing, drawn to the bewitching style of doo-wop, which, alongside gospel, blues, and jazz, would shape his future music. Ritz emphasizes that pain permeated Marvin's music, stemming from his childhood experiences, including physical beatings and the emotional pain of feeling unloved by his father, leaving him scarred and ill-equipped to handle the success he craved. By the age of 15, Marvin was growing restless and developing a critical awareness of the racial discrimination surrounding him, increasingly rebelling against the society that permitted it. By 1958, the narrative of Marvin Pentz Gay Jr.'s young life in Washington, D.C. was one of growing artistic ambition colliding with a stifling domestic reality. According to David Ritz in Divided Soul, The Life of Marvin Gaye, Marvin and his group, the Marquis, harbored a fervent desire to leave the district, their sights set on the major leagues of the music industry. This professional yearning, Ritz suggests, was intrinsically linked to Marvin's equally intense longing to escape the shadow of his father. The relationship between them was fraught with complexity, marked by a lack of paternal approval that would deeply wound the young singer. Ritz documents Marvin's recollection of sneaking back home, seeking sustenance and funds from his supportive mother, while his father seemed to anticipate his failure. This absence of paternal blessing, Ritz argues, contributed significantly to Marvin's enduring lack of confidence, fueling a lifelong quest for his father's acceptance, a validation that remained perpetually out of reach and left him with an insatiable need for love. These intricate familial dynamics, personal insecurities, and burgeoning musical aspirations set the stage for his eventual departure from Washington, D.C. Marvin's formative experiences were a potent blend of spiritual upbringing, paternal rejection, and a deep-seated desire to find his voice in a world that often felt both bewildering and promising. It was around this time that a significant figure entered Marvin's orbit, Harvey Fuqua. As David Ritz describes, Fuqua possessed a keen understanding of musical trends, particularly the burgeoning teenage music scene of the late 50s and early 60s. Fuqua would become Marvin Gaye's mentor, a pivotal presence at both the dawn and the twilight of his career. Marvin held Fuqua in high esteem, admiring his string of Moonglow's hits, such as Most of All and 10 Commandments of Love, a song Marvin himself had performed with the Marquis. Beyond commercial success, Marvin was drawn to the Moonglow's characteristic romanticism and Fuqua's talent as a writer and arranger, as Ritz explains. Fuqua was an innovator, having developed blow harmony, a distinctive vocal sound that set his group apart, a technique that Ritz highlights as becoming a crucial and lasting element of Marvin Gaye's own vocal repertoire. The encounter with Fuqua proved transformative for Marvin. In his conversations with David Ritz, Marvin likened the experience to a small-time piano player who suddenly became a student of Rubinstein's. While Fuqua's primary focus regarding songs was their commercial viability, his technical interests were profound, pushing Marvin towards perfectionism. Marvin recounted a sense of being stuck with the Marquis, feeling indistinguishable from other groups in D.C., until Fuqua's arrival brought a sense of hope and direction. Suddenly, as Ritz narrates, the possibility of touring became a reality, and the sonic landscape surrounding Marvin gained an unprecedented level of sophistication. In early 1959, at the age of 19, Marvin Gaye made the decisive move to leave home, joining the newly formed group, now named Harvey and the Moonglows, in Chicago. Reflecting on this departure, Marvin told Ritz of the difficulty of saying goodbye to both his mother and father, even with their difficult relationship with each other. He conveyed his promise to his mother that he would never desert her and that his actions were ultimately for her sake, a sentiment she believed. Towards his father, however, the emotions were more complex and unspoken. Ritz recounts that Marvin harbored a desire to express his wish to never see his father again, to erase the pain of his childhood, yet these words remained unuttered. Instead, a silent exchange occurred, a mutual understanding that this marked a significant turning point. Marvin was embarking on his own path, beyond his father's control. He told David Ritz that he was happy to be leaving the bad and sad memories behind. However, his search for an understanding and supportive father figure continued to be a source of deep frustration. He never found acceptance without authority or love without demands. The destination was Chicago, the home of Chess Records, a label with a rich history in recording prominent black musicians. Phil and Leonard Chess had established their label in the 40s, building a legacy by recording the raw energy of blues artists like Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, and Chuck Berry. It was within this vibrant and intense recording environment that Marvin Gaye found himself immersed. However, the output of Harvey and the Moonglows during this period was limited. Ritz notes that the group recorded only a few songs, and Marvin Gaye sang the lead on just one, Mama Lucci. This lively track, co-written by Gaye and Fuqua, showcased Marvin's vocal agility, moving from smooth tones to falsetto, engaging in playful wordplay. When Ritz inquired about the song's meaning, Marvin offered an unexpected interpretation: the perfect mother and perfect wife. Despite his analytical mind, Ritz observes that Marvin's creative process was largely instinctive, with reflection often coming after the act of creation, his singing and songwriting driven by genuine emotional expression. Another recording from this era, 12 Months of the Year, was an attempt to recapture the success of the earlier Moonglows hit, 10 Commandments of Love. On this track, Marvin contributed baritone harmony and recited spoken lines, a tradition among black vocal groups since the Ink Spots. Marvin took this role seriously, adopting not his characteristic quiet melancholy, but a distinct British accent, a vocal affectation he favored, reveling in the aristocratic sound of Old World English. While in Chicago, Marvin's ambition remained palpable. Reese, a contemporary of Marvin's, recalled to Ritz that Marvin's drive to be a star was unwavering. Content to be just one of the boys was never an option for him. In 1960, Harvey Fuqua made another pivotal move, relocating to Detroit and establishing his own label, Harvey Records. Among the artists he signed were tenor saxophonist Junior Walker and the singer he had brought from Washington, Marvin Gaye. As Marvin later recounted to Ritz, things began to coalesce in Detroit. Harvey Records connected with Anna Records, owned by Gwen Gordy, whose roster included artists like the Spinners and Lamont Dozier. This evolving landscape saw the emergence of Anna Tree Phi Records, Miracle Records featuring Jimmy Ruffin and the Temptations, and Berry Gordy's Tamla label. It soon became apparent to Marvin, as Ritz details, that despite his for-life contract with Harvey, Berry Gordy was poised to acquire him. Fuqua's need for capital made the transaction inevitable. Once Berry Gordy recognized the extent of Marvin's talent, a bid was made, and Harvey Fuqua sold his entire roster. The specific sum paid for Marvin remained unknown to him, but he suspected it was a figure that would cause him embarrassment due to its low value. This transaction was a personal blow for Gaye. He had regarded Fuqua not merely as a mentor, but as a surrogate father, one of the few constants in a life marked by instability. Yet, as was often the case with male authority figures in his life, Gaye's relationship with Fuqua was marked by both longing and conflict. He yearned for Fuqua's approval while simultaneously challenging his authority, a pattern that would repeat itself with others. With Fuqua's exit, Berry Gordy stepped into the paternal role. Gaye later reflected on the complexity of their relationship. Berry was cool, Berry was cold, Berry was a lot of things, he said. I've always fancied myself as a good reader of people, and I saw right off that, after his mom, he was the power. Gaye quickly recognized the necessity of aligning himself with Gordy, both for his survival and his ascent. "I knew I needed him, and I knew I wanted to stay around," he continued. "He was another guide, teacher, a cat who knew more than I did." At the same time, Detroit was at its cultural peak. The city was booming, simultaneously producing cars and hit records. Detroit was live, Gaye recalled, noting the influence of local legends like Little Willie John, one of his idols. It was a city alive with possibility, and Marvin Gaye was ready to step into its rhythm. Gordy's Tamla Records was incorporated into what would later become the burgeoning Motown empire, and Marvin Gaye's initial experiences there were characterized by a period of finding his footing amidst a collective of ambitious artists. His first album, The Soulful Moods of Marvin Gaye, released in 1961 and produced by Berry Gordy himself, attempted to establish him as a sophisticated pop singer, aiming for a crossover audience. Ritz details the album's wistful cover and Marvin's conks styled in the fashion of the time. The album consisted largely of standards, songs popularized by artists Marvin admired, such as Frank Sinatra and Billie Holiday. As Marvin admitted to Ritz, he sang Witchcraft because Sinatra sang it, and You Don't Know What Love Is because of Lady Day's rendition. However, it was the two non-standard tracks that proved most compelling. Berry Gordy's Let Your Conscience Be Your Guide, with its Ray Charles-influenced rhythm and blues flavor, and Never Let You Go, Shaloo Bop, co-written by Harvey and Anna Gordy, which showcased Marvin's falsetto. Despite the release of Conscience as his first single, both the single and the album failed to achieve commercial success. This debut also marked Marvin's official addition of the E to his surname, a decision driven by a combination of personal, professional, and psychological factors. One of his motivations was to create distance from his father. The change also reflected Gaye's desire to lend a sense of sophistication to his name. He reportedly believed the extra letter gave it a touch of elegance and polish. The decision was not without precedent. Gaye himself cited Sam Cooke, who had made a similar alteration to his own name, as inspiration. Gaye reasoned that if it had worked for Cooke, it might serve him just as well in establishing his own career and persona. Yet, even after the change, Gaye remained uneasy about his name. He was acutely aware of the jokes and insinuations people made by placing the word "is" in front of his name, a play on words that evidenced the tension he felt about public perception. At one point later in his career, he even considered dropping the E, once he had gained more self-assurance. According to saxophonist and Motown bandleader Beans Bowles, the deeper issue was rooted in Gaye's discomfort with his identity and the legacy of his upbringing. Bowles suggested that Marvin's real struggle was with being the son of a sexually ambiguous man and the associated shame he carried. In that context, the altered spelling was a symbolic gesture, a superficial change that did little to resolve the internal conflict it attempted to mask. Motown's subsequent strategy involved persistent efforts to market Marvin Gaye as a black equivalent of Nat King Cole. Over the next 4 years, Motown released at least half a dozen albums aimed at the white pop market. These albums, despite featuring lush orchestrations, as on When I'm Alone I Cry, produced by Clarence Paul, failed to resonate with the intended audience. Ritz suggests that this lack of success could be attributed to Motown's inability to effectively reach the white pop market, or to Marvin's voice lacking the emotional depth expected of seasoned balladeers. Regardless of the reason, Marvin found it difficult to acknowledge this or any other professional setback, his inflated but frail ego unable to accept rejection. Instead, he often made excuses and deflected blame. While he successfully seduced women, satisfying them sexually was another matter, and early on, he felt like a Superman who was afraid of flying. Because of this insecurity, he felt compelled to maintain an image as the ultimate lover, believing it was the only way women would accept him. Despite these commercial disappointments in his early solo career, Marvin's talent and charisma were undeniable. His quote, soft-spoken ways, his laughing eyes, his seductive sincerity, his warmth, wit, and little boy sweetness endeared him to those around him. This personal charm, Ritz argues, allowed him to navigate the early years at Motown despite the lack of immediate chart success as a pop crooner. However, Marvin harbored a persistent desire to be recognized as a serious ballad singer, a conflict that would define much of his artistic journey at Motown. As the early 60s progressed, Marvin's musical direction began to incorporate more of the rhythm and blues sensibilities that would eventually define his signature sound. David Ritz notes the release of Hitchhike in 1962, a dance track that quoted Ray Charles and became a moderate hit. This was followed by Pride and Joy in June 1963, which became Marvin's first song to cross over into the pop top 10, significantly raising his commercial profile. While this success would typically be a moment of celebration for an artist, Ritz observes that Marvin grew increasingly anxious, unable to fully embrace his achievements. It was during this period that Marvin Gaye's personal life also underwent a significant transformation. Marvin met Anna Gordy, Berry Gordy's elder sister. Their relationship blossomed, and they eventually married. Ritz suggests that for some time, Marvin found solace in Anna's company and was nurtured by the strong Gordy family, whose loyalty to one another was unwavering. His ambition aligned perfectly with their appreciation for his talent and their shared desire for financial success in the music industry. Initially, their marriage was fruitful, both emotionally and creatively. However, Ritz also notes that the Gordys, particularly Anna and Barry, were known for a degree of sexual liberalism, a factor that both intrigued and confused the young Marvin Gaye, who was still grappling with his own fears and insecurities. While enjoying his early success, Marvin maintained a distant relationship with his father. The birth of his son, Marvin Pentz Gaye III, in 1965, brought a brief period of warm family feelings. Marvin told Ritz that he was torn about naming his son after himself due to his complicated feelings towards his father, but ultimately tradition prevailed. Despite his desire to be a good father, Marvin's time with his young son was limited in the 60s. Rather than reconcile with his father, he consistently kept his distance. Marvin Gaye Sr.'s response to his son's rise to fame was deeply conflicted, marked by a mixture of muted pride, simmering jealousy, and emotional distance. From Marvin Gaye Jr.'s perspective, his father's attitude was never straightforward admiration, but rather a complex emotional tangle that mirrored the deep tensions within their relationship. Gaye Jr. recalled that his father had been collecting clippings and articles about him for a decade, a gesture that, on the surface, might suggest pride. However, Marvin interpreted it differently. It was more for his ego than mine, he later said. Despite occasional signs of approval, such as during the Marvin Gaye Day celebration in Washington, D.C., where Marvin believed he had, if only briefly, made his father proud, he remained unconvinced that his success had ever truly pleased Marvin Sr. Instead, he suspected that his father was more jealous than anything else, and went so far as to say he felt his father had been, quote, waiting for me to fall on my ass. That lingering need for approval never fully disappeared. Even in the wake of international acclaim and chart-topping hits, Marvin Jr. admitted he still longed for his father's blessing, an affirmation that never came. The emotional void left by its absence was never filled, and their relationship remained a source of unresolved tension. In later years, Marvin Gaye spoke of the enduring strife between them in harsh terms, describing a dynamic fraught with fierce competition, the jealousy, the head games, the hatred. Whatever pride Marvin Sr. may have harbored for his son's achievements, it was consistently undermined by a deeper, more corrosive resentment, one that would haunt their relationship. Over time, Marvin's artistic ambitions began to chafe against the constraints he felt at Motown. David Ritz describes his evolving relationship with his mentors, Harvey Fuqua and Berry Gordy, transitioning from reliance to a growing desire for independence. While he admired Gordy's business acumen, Marvin increasingly resented the feeling of being molded into something he wasn't. As Ritz recounts, Marvin spoke of feeling like the shuffle and jivers of old steppin' and fetchin' for the white folk. This internal conflict, coupled with the changing social and political landscape of the mid to late 60s, began to influence his music. The latter half of the 60s saw a significant shift in Marvin Gaye's artistic output. His music began to reflect a deeper emotional complexity and a growing awareness of social issues. While earlier hits showcased his vocal prowess and dance rhythms, songs like Heard It Through the Grapevine, released in 1968, revealed a raw vulnerability and emotional intensity. Marvin connected deeply with the lyrics of this song, which mirrored his own personal experiences with doubt and suspicion in his relationship. This marked a turning point, demonstrating his capacity for powerful performances rooted in his own life experiences. Marvin's music was deeply intertwined with the pain of his life, particularly the emotional and physical pain inflicted by his father. This suffering, ironically, became a powerful source of his artistic inspiration. He identified with Jesus as a martyr, believing his pain could be transformed into meaningful art. However, he failed in his deep desire to create a happy family, remaining entangled with Anna and prolonging his domestic misery, perhaps more afraid of loneliness than familiar heartache. David Ritz notes that even as Marvin achieved significant material success, he seemed to run from it, continuing a process of self-searching that often led to new crises. Ritz suggests that a part of Marvin's psyche, stimulated by trauma, had a tolerance, even a need, for emotional turmoil. David Ritz describes Marvin's constant self-doubt, which persisted even as his career flourished. Because of the influential roles of Anna and Berry Gordy in his career, Marvin never fully believed in his own artistic merit as the sole driver of his success. He masked his insecurities with a cool and confident exterior, occasionally embodying a suave crooner persona. Yet deep down, his fear often outweighed his faith. In 1968, Marvin bought his father a Cadillac, hoping to make amends. However, when David Ritz asked if his father was grateful, Marvin replied, "Not especially." Marvin admitted that he wanted to invite his father to visit but refrained from doing so, sensing his own reluctance and his father's resulting anger, creating a vicious cycle. This cycle, according to Ritz, intensified with Marvin's growing success, as his father became both proud and jealous, while Marvin, fearing the heights he was reaching, longed for his father's steadying hand, which was never offered. Marvin's personal life during this era was marked by increasing turbulence. As David Ritz chronicles, his marriage to Anna Gordy began to unravel. The initial comfort and support he found within the Gordy family gave way to jealousy and strain. Ritz notes Marvin's jealousy of Anna's closeness to her brother Barry, mirroring his earlier jealousy of his mother's relationship with his father. This marital discord, combined with his evolving artistic sensibilities, fueled a new chapter in his music, characterized by themes of infidelity and personal anguish, even in songs written by others. The dawn of the 1970s witnessed a monumental creative breakthrough for Marvin Gaye with the release of What's Going On in early 1971. This album, largely self-produced and co-written by Marvin, represented a steep departure from the traditional Motown formula. Ritz highlights the album's exploration of themes like war, pollution, poverty, and social injustice, reflecting a profound engagement with the turbulent times. Marvin's perspective was a blend of faith and despair, articulated through a cohesive musical suite that defied Motown's initial reservations about its length and unconventional structure. Despite facing resistance from Motown management, Marvin's insistence on releasing the album proved to be a pivotal moment, transforming his image into that of a serious and complex artist. Following the critical and commercial triumph of What's Going On, Marvin continued to explore diverse musical and personal territories. David Ritz chronicles his subsequent projects, including the soundtrack for the film Trouble Man in 1972, where Marvin wrote every song alone, delving into a darker, more introspective mood. Marvin Gaye's relationship with Janus Hunter was marked by deep passion, emotional volatility, and lasting psychological turmoil. They met in the Motown studio during the recording of Let's Get It On, where Marvin, then 33 and still married, was instantly infatuated with the teenage Janus, describing her as the embodiment of his fantasies. their romance quickly became entangled with his music. The album I Want You served as a confessional tribute to Janus, blending sensuality with spiritual longing. Yet beneath the intensity lay darker patterns. Marvin struggled with a Madonna whore complex, idealizing and resenting Janus in equal measure. He confessed to drawing her into his wild and wicked ways, including obsessive fantasies involving her with other men, something he later admitted he compelled her to entertain. Gaye and Hunter married in 1977 after 2 children, but tensions persisted. Marvin opposed Janus's aspirations to sing, insisting she remain a housewife. Close friends, including Jewel Price, noted the powerful grip Janus had on his emotions, often dictating his moods. His relationship with Anna Gordy ultimately ended in divorce, with Anna filing in early 1975 when he was already with Janus. The release of the album Here My Dear in 1978, a deeply personal and financially costly account of his divorce from Anna, was met with critical indifference and commercial failure, further exacerbating his financial woes. David Ritz notes that critics like Vivian Goldman from Melody Maker dismissed the work as banal meanderings. Gaye himself, recalling the early Motown days, lamented his pursuit of the mighty dollar, realizing that achieving stardom was far more challenging than he initially believed. His attempts to finalize his new album, tentatively titled Love Man, were fraught with creative and emotional blocks. Adding to his turmoil, his relationship with Janus Hunter, which had spanned 6 years, had deteriorated into a nightmare. As Ritz recounts, Marvin felt himself spiraling, recognizing that he had yet to hit rock bottom. The late 1970s brought increasing financial difficulties for Marvin Gaye, exacerbated by his protracted and costly divorce proceedings and his growing substance abuse issues. By 1979, Marvin's financial situation had become dire, leading him to file for bankruptcy. This confluence of financial woes, romantic heartaches, and artistic struggles culminated in Marvin Gaye's decision to leave the United States. As Ritz chronicles, he embarked on a self-imposed exile, first to Hawaii in late 1979 and later to Europe, seeking escape from his mounting problems and a fresh start. This tropical sojourn, intended as an escape, soon morphed into a period of profound isolation and chronic depression. Gaye himself admitted that death was much on my mind, viewing it as the only viable exit. He recounted a near-fatal cocaine overdose, believing he had died only to be spared for some unknown purpose. His living conditions were far from glamorous. Photographer Ken Grant described finding Marvin, along with his young son and an associate named Fleecy, residing in a funky old bread van parked by the edge of a cliff overlooking the ocean in Maui. Despite projecting an image of being broke, Ritz reveals that Marvin had access to significant funds, evidenced by a letter from a Hawaiian bank offering him a $100,000 line of credit. This facade of poverty, Ritz suggests, was part of Gaye's manipulative nature. During his time in Hawaii, Marvin's mental state remained precarious. He oscillated between moments of clarity and deep despair, describing his exile as one long nervous breakdown. His fascination with the Book of Revelation intensified his anxieties about the end of everything. Simultaneously, he made tentative efforts towards artistic creation, sending for some of his musicians and relocating to a 2-bedroom apartment in Quilima on Oahu. According to Ritz, Gaye felt a deeper obligation to the truth, leading him to abandon the Love Man project, which he felt was too focused on his tumultuous relationship with Janus. Instead, he began to channel his anxieties into a new concept album centered on the threat of nuclear destruction, a theme that had been present in What's Going On. Gaye used his music as a means of survival, transforming his suffering into artistic expression. By the summer of 1980, Marvin Gaye's Hawaiian exile came to an end as he embarked on a European tour organized by Jeffrey Kruger. However, his escape from America was merely a prelude to another period of personal and professional turmoil. Following the tour, Gaye missed his flight back to the United States, unable to confront his tax problems, alimony obligations, and the complexities of his personal life. He wandered through England and Europe for another 2.5 years, a period Ritz describes as a search for his soul. He established a residence in London's West End and formed a relationship with Eugenie Wies, a student from Holland. A significant event during his time in London was the unauthorized release of his album In Our Lifetime by Motown Records. Gaye was infuriated by changes made to the mix without his consent and vowed never to work with Motown again. While Gaye renounced the album, Ritz considers it an attestation to his musical and spiritual vitality. Despite the critical view that the album was eccentric and inaccessible, Ritz argues that it was a major work, highlighting Gaye's soul composition of every song. Gaye himself expressed conflicting views on the album, sometimes disowning it and at other times praising it. In an interview with Blues and Soul magazine, he stated that it was definitively his last album for Motown and threatened to cease recording altogether if Berry Gordy did not release him from his obligations. During his time in England, Marvin Gaye's drug use continued, and his mental health remained fragile. Hollywood agent Jeff Wald recounted visiting Gaye in London and finding him heavily intoxicated in a chaotic apartment. Wald provided Gaye with money and urged him to seek help, recognizing his immense talent and potential. Eventually, in the spring of 1981, Marvin Gaye was assisted by Freddie Cousert, a businessman from Belgium who, according to Ritz, rescued the singer from a precarious situation in London. Cousert facilitated Gaye's move to Ostend, Belgium, where he began a process of physical and mental rehabilitation. He started exercising, and his girlfriend Eugenie visited regularly. In Belgium, Marvin Gaye began working on new music, leading to a new record deal with CBS Records. Despite his improved physical health, Ritz notes that Gaye's interviews during this period still revealed a deep melancholy. He spoke of death with a strange acceptance, viewing it as the ultimate escape. However, he also found solace in his new environment, describing the sea as pleasant and life as simple and calm. As the winter of 1982 turned to spring, Gaye had secured his release from Motown and a promising new contract with CBS, setting the stage for his return to America. His time in exile, spanning nearly 3 years, was drawing to a close, yet as David Ritz poignantly suggests, this return would not bring the peace he so desperately sought. His comeback, marked by the phenomenal success of Sexual Healing, ultimately set the path to his downfall. According to Ritz, the renewed success paradoxically aggravated Gaye's lifelong fears and self-loathing, making it impossible to distinguish between trustworthy individuals and opportunists in his life. October 1982 marked a turning point with the release of Sexual Healing as a single, which Billboard reported became the fastest-rising soul single in 5 years and quickly achieved crossover success. Though his aim was for multiple top 10 hits from the Midnight Love album, Sexual Healing stood alone as its chart-topping song. Nevertheless, its impact was significant, holding the #1 spot in the soul category for 4 months, a feat only matched by Ray Charles's I Can't Stop Loving You in 1962, and reaching #3 on the pop charts. People magazine even likened its cultural impact to Olivia Newton-John's Physical, noting it as America's hottest pop culture turn-on. However, Ritz clarifies that the catalyst for Marvin's return to the United States was not the success of Sexual Healing itself, but the grave illness of his mother, Alberta Gaye, who was hospitalized in Los Angeles with a kidney ailment requiring a risky operation. Marvin was deeply apprehensive about the homecoming and even the plane journey itself, requiring sedation before he would board. Despite his fears, early November 1982 saw his return after nearly 3 years of self-imposed exile. He presented an image of radiant success, having navigated label changes, cleared substantial debts, and returned home free from legal threats. Yet his mother's critical health overshadowed these achievements. While he flew home from Belgium, Alberta was undergoing surgery in Los Angeles, which upon his arrival he learned it had been successful. His father, Marvin Gaye Sr., was in Washington at the time, a fact that brought the younger Gaye both relief and anger. Marvin moved into his new manager Marilyn Freeman's apartment, using her as a shield against the overwhelming attention brought by his renewed fame. Speaking by phone a week after his arrival, he confided to Ritz his pleasure at his hit, and his fury with his father for neglecting his mother during her illness, confessing that he urged her to divorce him, a sentiment he believed fueled his father's animosity towards him. Eager for the attention he had been absent from for 3 years, Marvin welcomed the press to Marilyn's apartment, granting numerous interviews over the next 10 months to promote his album and subsequent tour. In September 1982, prior to Marvin's return, his father had relocated to Washington for a 6-month stay, creating a palpable sense of relief within the family home in Los Angeles for Alberta, siblings Jean and Frankie, Frankie's pregnant wife Irene, and other relatives. They reported that the house felt livable again in the absence of the elder gay's constant demands and temper. Surprisingly, Ritz notes that after Alberta's hospitalization, her husband never returned, not for the surgery nor her convalescence. Later, Marvin made his first major public appearance at a lavish CBS party celebrating his success, where he received gold records for Sexual Healing and the Midnight Love album. Throughout this period of what Ritz calls Marvin's final psychological decline, he was inundated with honors and awards. He adopted a new, more diplomatic image, partially shaving his beard after 12 years. At the CBS event, he sang The Lord's Prayer a cappella, evoking a strong reaction from the Hollywood crowd, yet he also indulged in cocaine use in the men's room. Both his former wives, Anna Gordy and Janice Hunter, were present during this time, with Anna frequently by his side, seemingly enjoying the renewed attention. During this time, Gay became entangled again with both women he had previously vowed to exclude from his life. By the end of November, his popularity soared, securing his status as a trendsetter across 3 decades, having navigated numerous shifts in musical fashion over his 22-year career, during which he recorded 26 albums and achieved over 40 hits. Despite his booming record sales, Marvin's financial woes returned. During a family gathering in mid-November, he expressed distress over his finances, lamenting that government taxes would leave him with nothing, and that touring, the very thing he dreaded, seemed his only path to solvency. While vacationing in Palm Springs for Thanksgiving with his mother, he spoke with Patrick Terrell from Actuel magazine, revealing the intimate inspiration behind Sexual Healing, stating, "I started by kissing a woman behind the ear," and elaborating on further intimacies. The conversation took a sensitive turn when Terrell's remark about age and potency elicited a defensive response from Marvin, revealing a growing concern about sexual dysfunction, though he remained unwilling to seek help. Instead, he returned to past obsessions, spending time at Anna's former home and pursuing Janice intensely despite her repeated rejections. January 1983 brought another significant event, the return of Marvin Gaye Sr. to the Los Angeles home, a development that immediately heightened the tension within the family. According to Ritz, Jean, who had been living there, moved out, sensing the impending conflict. With his father's return, the dynamic of head of household, which Marvin had assumed during his absence, was disrupted, reigniting the long-standing struggle between father and son, centered on their mother's affection. Marvin questioned his father's absence during Alberta's illness and resented his return without explanation or apology. Marvin's instinct was to expel his father, while the elder Gay aimed to prevent Marvin's presence, perpetuating a cycle of competition, jealousy, and resentment spanning 4 decades. Increasingly reliant on cocaine, Marvin was forced to relinquish the rental properties in Bel Air and Palm Springs. His performance of Sexual Healing at the 25th Annual Grammy Awards in February 1983 was a personal triumph, earning him his only 2 Grammys, despite his own admission that his off-timing and forced vocal delivery resulted from being high. Throughout the first half of 1983, Marvin's increasingly disturbed demeanor became evident during television appearances. In an interview with Tom Joyner for Ebony Jet's Celebrity Showcase, he appeared distracted and compulsively chewed gum, a habit he had developed for public speaking. Joyner noted that Marvin seemed very drugged during the taping, which occurred while he was rehearsing for his upcoming tour. The tour, driven by financial necessity, became unavoidable. This pattern of reluctance to tour following major recording successes only to be compelled by money demands, was a recurring theme in his professional life. Despite a new set of costumes, singers, dancers, and a band, the old anxieties and guilt resurfaced, aggravated by his feeling of being exploited as a servant of sex. In Marvin's mind, as Ritz writes, the devil called, the devil he could never quite resist. On April 1st, 1983, the day before his 44th birthday, Marvin was preparing for his first American concert since 1979. His usual ability to find humor in his situation had vanished, and he was acutely aware of his near-constant decline. He recognized that his own success had created a fatal trap, yet felt powerless to break the cycle. Robert Hilburn, reviewing his tour opener in San Diego on April 18, 1983, for the Los Angeles Times, described Gaye's stage presence as overly sexualized, noting his nervousness and attempts to compensate for his absence from the stage. Hilburn likened his final performances to the later works of Faulkner and Hemingway, suggesting they had become a parody of his former artistry. Predictions arose even before the tour's start in April that he might not complete its run to August 14th, yet he persevered due to the challenge. The early part of the tour showed promise, with a successful performance on the Motown 25th anniversary special in May, and 8 consecutive sold-out shows at Radio City Music Hall. However, beneath the surface, Marvin was deeply troubled, his internal conflicts as profound as ever, as he kept a preacher in one room and his drug supply in another. Overwhelmed by fear, he asked his brother Frankie to accompany him. His paranoia escalated, leading to the presence of a submachine gun and an assortment of pistols among his aides. Marvin became obsessed with guns, a manifestation of his fear and rage masking a sense of impotence. Despite elaborate security measures, including bulletproof vests, bodyguards, and armed security outside his hotel rooms, he remained convinced that each new city held the threat of being gunned down. According to his bodyguard, Dave Simmons, Marvin was too afraid to go anywhere but the hotel, and he was even scared to go there. Midway through the tour, attendance plummeted. In a desperate attempt to maintain the show's excitement, fueled by insecurity about his virility, he began exposing himself on stage. Depression consumed him, leading to hospitalization for exhaustion in Florida and missed engagements. The tour concluded in Los Angeles in August with underattended concerts at the Greek Theater. Alberta Gaye recounted to Ritz her shock at Marvin's deteriorated state after the tour, noting his exhaustion and his refusal to seek medical help, fearing forced confinement. Ritz states that death awaited him, a fate he knew and increasingly envisioned, as he tried to find solace in scripture while battling his cocaine addiction. During the early phase of the tour, paranoia was constant, fueled by reported death threats, though Ritz suggests these were not unusual for a major touring entertainer, and no actual attacks materialized. Nevertheless, Marvin was convinced he was being stalked and that someone intended to murder him by shooting him with a pistol, a scenario he repeatedly envisioned. In a desperate attempt to find stability, Janice joined him on the road, but their decade-long conflict only worsened, and he soon sent her home. His erratic behavior escalated, culminating in a Boston press conference where he announced that he had hired F. Lee Bailey to investigate his recent poisoning, claiming a conspiracy and crediting Dick Gregory's formula for saving his life. In the late summer of 1983, Marvin's mental state declined rapidly. He retreated to his parents' home, sleeping in his bedroom adjacent to his mother's, with his father's room nearby. According to Alberta Gaye, tensions between her and her husband were high due to the unresolved issue of the proceeds from their sold house in Washington, further upsetting Marvin, who always felt caught in the middle. His drug use escalated, even in his mother's presence, despite his repeated promises to stop. With Marvin high on cocaine and his father often drunk on vodka down the hall, the house was filled with a toxic atmosphere of chemicals, memories, and mutual hostility. Even Alberta, his strongest supporter, could not deny his deterioration, revealing that people continuously brought him drugs despite her pleas to him to discard them. She also mentioned his preoccupation with guns. He was a scared little boy, she said, recalling his intense fear and her attempts to reassure him. While she managed to get him to throw out one gun, Someone then gave him a submachine gun, which he eventually threw through his bedroom window in frustration. His sister Jean believed, quote, he wanted to die. He couldn't take it anymore. Reports surfaced of Marvin's fury being directed at women, including an incident where he allegedly kicked one down the stairs. Alberta confirmed these incidents, describing him treating an English and a Japanese woman terribly, acknowledging that her, quote, poor son turned into a monster. Ritz interprets this behavior, the guns and the violence against women, as a classic manifestation of an impotent male, his duality consumed by his inner demons, fulfilling his own grim prediction that evil was prevailing. In late March of 1984, his condition worsened dramatically. Marvin's sister-in-law, Irene Gay, who brought him food, described him as completely crazy, unable to dress himself properly and looking like a bum. He incessantly demanded more cocaine and pornographic movies, retreating into his bedroom, mirroring his father's behavior. As Ritz poignantly states, the killer was loose. Father was down the hall. The physical altercations between father and son, long suppressed, became more frequent. The culmination approached on April 1, 1984, a Sunday morning in Los Angeles. Marvin Gaye Sr. was agitated by a missing insurance letter and his son's presence in the house for the past 6 months, their relationship having become deadly poisonous. In Marvin's perception, he was the provider, a fact his father never accepted. Marvin's paranoia was debilitating, leaving him afraid to leave his room, consumed by thoughts of suicide and death, a trapped animal awaiting his end. Jean Gay revealed that just 4 days prior, Marvin had attempted suicide by jumping from a moving car. The tension in the house was palpable, with both father and son aware of each other's addictions and resentment. A confrontation was triggered by the missing letter. Marvin intervened when his father, shouting at Alberta from the living room in frustration over the missing document, refused to speak to her directly, insisting that he address his mother appropriately and respectfully. Enraged, Gay Sr. went upstairs to Marvin's bedroom, where he scolded Alberta. Marvin defended his mother, leading to a physical altercation where, according to Alberta, Marvin struck his father multiple times. Jean Gay recalled that their father had previously stated he would kill Marvin if he ever struck him. Alberta eventually separated them and convinced Marvin to return to his room. Minutes later, his father reappeared at the door, seemingly composed, holding a .38 caliber revolver, a gun Marvin had given him months earlier for protection. The elder Gay aimed and fired, the bullet tearing through Marvin's heart, causing him to collapse. He then took a few steps closer and fired again at point-blank range. Alberta screamed for mercy. Despite her weakened state, she fled downstairs, followed by her husband, who placed the gun on the lawn and waited for the police. Alberta, the sole eyewitness, fled to her other son Frank's home to call the police. Police found Marvin Gaye Sr. sitting calmly on the front porch with the gun on the lawn, making no attempt to escape. Officer Diaz stated that Reverend Gay claimed self-defense, saying he had been beaten by his son, characterizing it as a heat of passion thing. At 1:01 p.m. at the California Hospital Medical Center, Marvin Gaye Jr. was pronounced dead 1 day before his 45th birthday. At the time of his death, Marvin Gaye had no will or insurance policy, according to his attorney Howard Rash. His 3 children would inherit his estate after debts, including over $1 million in back taxes owed to the government. Rash maintained that Marvin's financial situation was improving with good record sales, a successful tour, and work on a new album. However, Gaye himself held a less optimistic view of his troubled life. Marvin's manager, Andre White, suggested in Jet magazine that Gaye may have subconsciously desired his father to end his suffering and paranoia, a form of psychological suicide. White believed Gaye felt his burdens were too heavy and that he was taken advantage of. The aftermath of the gunshots fired on April 1st, 1984, at the Gay residence in Los Angeles set in motion a series of legal proceedings against Marvin Gaye Sr., a sequence detailed by David Ritz in Divided Soul, The Life of Marvin Gaye. Marvin Gaye Sr. was taken into custody without resistance, marking the initial step into the legal labyrinth that would define his remaining years. The formal legal process began with Marvin Gaye Sr.'s arraignment, where he entered a plea of not guilty. According to Ritz, during an interview conducted while incarcerated, the elder Mr. Gaye revealed a startling claim. He asserted that he did not believe the gun had contained real bullets. This statement suggested a profound disconnect from the reality of his actions, a mind seemingly unwilling or unable to confront the incontrovertible truth of his son's death at his hand. Only Marvin's daughter, Sweetie Gaye, visited him in jail, a visit during which Jet magazine took photographs. A significant development in the legal proceedings occurred later in April when a medical examination revealed a walnut-sized brain tumor in Marvin Gaye Sr.'s head. This discovery introduced a crucial element into the assessment of his mental state at the time of the shooting. Following the successful removal of the tumor in May, a Superior Court judge ruled him mentally competent to stand trial, a decision that allowed the legal process to continue. According to Ritz, the court-appointed psychiatrist stated that Marvin Gaye Sr. continued to provide a consistent story regarding the shooting of his son, which he labels as self-defense. This narrative of self-defense would become central to his legal strategy. During the legal proceedings, the judge presiding over the case made a note of the coroner's report, stating that based on what Ritz describes as the lawyer's misreading, PCP was found in Marvin Gaye's system, a drug known to potentially induce violence. However, this assertion was later contradicted when it was clarified that the coroner's report actually indicated that no other drugs except traces of cocaine were evident in Marvin Gaye. Despite this factual correction, Judge Gordon Ringer maintained that the PCP question had not been a major factor in his decision-making process. The legal journey culminated on November 2, 1984, when Marvin Gaye Sr. was sentenced to 5 years of probation, thus avoiding imprisonment. Judge Ringer was persuaded by the defense's argument that a drug-crazed Marvin had attacked his father on 2 prior occasions, leading the elder Mr. Gaye to act in self-defense when he shot his son. Following the sentencing, Marvin Gaye Sr. continued to live in a retirement home in Southern California. David Ritz notes that, even when interviewed years after the tragic event, Marvin Gaye Sr. revealed absolutely no memory of having shot his son. His mind refuses to accept the incontrovertible fact. The emotional and familial repercussions of the legal proceedings were profound. Alberta Gaye had considered leaving her husband many times before the shooting, but lacked the courage, feeling both pity and fear. However, in the aftermath, she initiated divorce proceedings, stating to Ritz, "I no longer want to be called his wife. I no longer want to be told what to do. There's too much sorrow in my heart, so much sorrow." Jean Gaye, Marvin's sister, offered a poignant perspective to David Ritz after the funeral, stating, "I have no doubt this is exactly how Marvin chose to die. He punished father by making certain that the rest of his life would be miserable." After serving a suspended sentence and probation for the shooting of his son, Marvin Gaye Sr. briefly returned to the Gramercy Place residence. However, declining health necessitated his move to a nursing facility in Inglewood around 1986. In his final years, he resided in a Culver City nursing home, where he passed away from pneumonia on October 10, 1998, 9 days after his 84th birthday. Alberta Gaye spent her final years battling bone cancer, a struggle that left her increasingly frail and dependent on the care of her daughter Jean at her home in Burbank. Despite her declining health, Alberta remained committed to honoring her son's legacy. In 1986, she founded the Marvin P. Gaye Jr. Memorial Foundation, dedicated to supporting individuals grappling with drug and alcohol addiction, a cause close to her heart given Marvin's own struggles. However, Alberta passed away before the foundation could fully open its doors. She died on May 8, 1987 at St. Joseph Medical Center in Burbank after years of enduring the effects of cancer. She was 74 years old. The death of Marvin Gaye sent shockwaves through the music world, leaving a void felt deeply by artists he had inspired. According to David Ritz in Divided Soul, Janet Jackson, reflecting on Gaye's legacy, stated, "He's our John Lennon. The longer he's gone, the more young people appreciate his contribution. He changed our musical world." Ritz further details the immediate outpouring of tributes in the form of hit singles such as Diana Ross singing Lionel Richie's "Missing You," the Commodores' "Night Shift," and Frankie Beverly and Maze's "Silky Soul Singer." Moreover, Divided Soul notes the diverse range of artists who reinterpreted Gaye's songs soon after his death, including jazz avant-gardists Weather Report and pop singer Cyndi Lauper both performing What's Going On, hip-hoppers By All Means with Let's Get It On, and heartthrobs George Michael with a live version of Sexual Healing, and Robert Palmer covering Mercy Mercy Me, The Ecology, I Want You. Billboard magazine indicated that Marvin's name was mentioned in reverential tones on no less than 7 top 10 hit records since 1983, a proof of his enduring influence even in the immediate aftermath of his passing. The tributes continued to accrue with reissues of his recordings also proliferating. Albums like What's Going On, released in 1971, hold a significant and enduring place in music history, particularly for their courageous engagement with social and political issues. David Ritz in Divided Soul emphasizes that with this album, Gaye moved beyond conventional love songs to address themes of war, pollution, heroin addiction, and the struggles of inner-city life. Ritz highlights the album's innovative sound, a vast, melodically deft symphonic pop suite that blended various musical styles to convey its potent messages. The impact of What's Going On was profound, with Time magazine quoting Reverend Jesse Jackson's assessment that Gaye was as much a minister as any man in any pulpit after listening to the album. Ritz writes that Gaye himself saw a divine connection to his work, stating, "God and I travel together with righteousness and goodness. If people want to follow along, they can." The album's continued relevance lies in its unflinching exploration of societal ills, setting a precedent for other artists to use their music as a platform for social commentary, a legacy that Ritz implies has continued to resonate through subsequent generations of musicians. The tragic circumstances surrounding Marvin Gaye's death grimly illuminated the destructive forces of domestic violence and the often hidden struggles with mental health within families. David Ritz, in Divided Soul, paints a picture of a deeply troubled relationship between Marvin and his father, fueled by years of resentment and exacerbated by substance abuse. Marvin's own psychological state, marked by increasing paranoia and fears, contributed to the volatile atmosphere in the Gaye household in the period leading up to the shooting. The fact that Marvin Gaye Sr. claimed to have no memory of shooting his son indicates the potential interplay of mental health issues and the devastating consequences of domestic conflict. Marvin's life, as chronicled by David Ritz, was a complex world of artistic brilliance, intertwined with personal demons and familial strife. A tragic narrative that brought the often silenced issues of domestic violence and mental health into severe and public focus. Despite his tragic end, Marvin Gaye's musical legacy lived on, with a surge in sales of his previous albums following his death and continued airplay of his numerous hits. His impact as an artist who sought to awaken the human spirit remained a powerful tribute to his life.